about Michael K. Lloyd.
Okay, I was born here in New York City, Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Shortly after birth, my parents moved to the Bronx, the Patterson Projects, and I spent my grammar school years at PS 13. And then I was fortunate enough that my parents were able to purchase their first home in the Northeast Bronx, and I completed my 6th grade education at PS 18. And from there, I went and attended Junior High School 113, that was at that time known as Olinville. I attended high school in the North Bronx, a parochial high school, Mount St. Michael, and then went off to college. I took a Bachelor of Arts degree out of the University of Massachusetts and spent several years as a legislative aide to a state senator, the first Black American state senator elected in the history of Massachusetts. I returned to New York and took a law degree at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey, and after graduation began the practice of law as a solo practitioner and businessman. I concentrated in the lower courts of New York City, basically representing our people in landlord-tenant court, representing tenants. Did some family court work, representing parents and individuals involved in family matters. And most recently, for the past 10 years, I've been an impartial hearing officer, a state hearing officer, hearing cases involving handicapped children under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I think that I've had a well-rounded 30-year history of representing our people in the courts that they most frequently find themselves.
Michael, the public advocate is also a voice for those too easily overlooked by City Hall: our children, working families, and the poor. What are some of the flaws you see happening in New York City government that will change once you take office?
Well, there are several flaws or circumstances that I see that the city has fallen down on to some respect. When you take a look at transportation, our subway system is probably the filthiest in the nation. We have an overwhelming rodent problem. The city's response was to remove the trash cans. That, of course, does not lead to a very sanitary condition, and we can tell that by simply looking at the litter, the garbage on the tracks of the system. As another example, New York City, as important as it is to world commerce, does not or is not equipped with cell phone communication technology. Now, I understand that these are big ticket contract items, and this system has to be put together in such a way as to provide businesses the opportunity to address this. But cell phone technology in this late day is an important asset to the city, and the city must begin to move to address telephone access in the system via these cell phones. Other cities have it. There's no reason why New York, the jewel of the United States, and in fact the jewel of the world, ought not to have communication capacity within the subway system. With regard to education, as I mentioned perhaps earlier, that I serve as an impartial hearing officer for handicapped children. Most recently, test results have indicated that general education students are failing miserably. If I remember correctly, when the current administration took over the city school system, there were about 25 or 27% of the professional workforce in the educational system were minorities. And last I looked, that has now dwindled to about 17%. And it's really a shame that minority professionals have either been forced out of the system and or have left the system because of the way the system is being run. I understand cost savings, but I also understand that a master teacher with 18, 19, 20 years in ought not to be forced out because of salary determinations. As your teachers become more senior, more experienced, they get better. And these are the teachers that are being forced out of the system in lieu of new recruits from all over the country through educational programs, Teach for America, etc., that's been invited into New York City and in fact don't have a clue about how to handle our children, about how to help nourish and educate them. And I don't think that this is a proper way that the educational system ought to be run. As far as the handicapped children are concerned, the federal government and the state government provide for certain mandatory services and circumstances to be provided for the least of our children. Very often, the system is not equipped, and the personnel in charge often do not provide that which is mandated by federal and state law. The results across the board of the handicapped children circumstance are dismal. There's a great deal of money being squandered because the system is not functioning properly. I can fix that.
Okay. What most people want to know, Attorney Lloyd, why didn't you run under the traditional parties, such as Democrat or Republican parties?
Well, my first response to that is, I am not a politician. That is not my career. That is not my choosing. I'm an attorney and a problem solver, for those who are least equipped to solve their own problems and often do not have opportunity or resources to acquire competent personnel, competent services. So in that regard, I never viewed myself as a political activist. However, I see a need. There are many things that are going on. Our politicians, most recently across the board, at the state level, at the local level, there's a lot of corruption in the system. People do not have the personal courage and integrity to not take advantage of their positions. I've always had enough growing up. I'm not looking for a new automobile. I'm not looking for a house in Sag Harbor. I'm not seeking to acquire wealth through and on the backs of the population. I'm seeking to run because I think that I can do a better job. I'm seeking to run because I think that I've become actually sophisticated in solving problems with the least amount of trauma. However, there's a great tension in our city, a tension between the rich and the not so rich. And the not so rich are suffering greatly. It is my intention to provide service to them across the board so that they can have better lives.
So, Attorney Lloyd, why the Freedom Party and why now?
Well, as I tried to indicate earlier, the Democratic and Republican parties and their minions, their offshoots, their associated parties are about the development of the politicians. The Freedom Party has, in my humble opinion, began to address the needs of particularly African American citizens who have for so long been manipulated by both parties. And I felt that there was a level of integrity in the Freedom Party that is missing from all the other parties. But further, the Freedom Party, well, should I say, there has never been a political party specifically developed, owned, operated, and controlled by African Americans. We are always being divided, cut up, split up. Our votes are sought after, but they never have the opportunity to coalesce into a bloc, much like other ethnic groups. Other ethnic groups have not suffered the level of division, obfuscation, and splitting such that the power of their communities are not recognized. And if you look around, for the last 20 years, there has been a socio-ethnic cleansing of the city of New York. Neighborhoods are changing rapidly. Neighborhoods, names are being changed. I happen to live in Washington Heights. Now that neighborhood is being flooded with newcomers, and all of a sudden I find that the name of my neighborhood has been changed to Hudson Heights. They're doing this all over the city, whether it's Fort Greene, whether it's Bed-Stuy, whether it's Crown Heights. There are incursions occurring into what have traditionally been African American enclaves, to the point where the political power of those ethnic communities are being diminished. I don't think this is right and proper. I don't think this substantiates or affords us a continued solid presence within the Democratic or the Republican process.